Nicole and Timberland, we all got together and decided to put on this week to discuss and look at where New Hampshire is going for our energy future. And so, we're going to all different parts of the state. This is such a fabulous event here in the Monadnock region, and we're holding events in Concord on Thursday. You're all invited to them. There's a program right at this table behind here, and then events in the Seacoast and in other places to just really talk about, what are we doing? What are the policies we have today? What's working? What isn't? And, like what Phil said about a regional strategy, what do we really want our state strategy to be as well? So I'm looking forward to hearing all of your stories. If you are into using Twitter, we can create some buzz about this on Twitter. You can take pictures of people speaking, what they're saying. There's a hashtag New Hampshire Energy Week. So feel free to do that throughout the evening. And I will turn it back over to Phil, our MC. Thanks, Phil.
I'm serious about that, by the way, if you ever have a question about anything energy related. She's the one. Okay, so we're going to get started right now. The first speaker, since we're in the city of Keene, and the speakers, ask them to come up here. For those of you who feel like wandering around is a good idea, you can do that. We have wires. We have lots of wires, so you can wander around if you want to do that, or just stay right here. But we are in the city of Keene, and the city of Keene has been doing some incredible stuff with energy for a long time. And to tell you about that, Rhett Lamb.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome to the city of Keene. Glad we're doing it today, not tomorrow. What I'm going to be talking about is Keene's energy program, our climate program. And we got some really good news to tell. Back in the late 90s, the city got involved in energy from a couple points of view. From our concern about climate change and the risk of a changing climate on our city, on our citizens, both in terms of the cost of energy over time and saving taxpayer money on city investments in energy, and also from the point of view of the impacts of climate change, whether it was from flooding or other potential impacts of a changing climate. So we got heavily into this, and the first thing we did was an inventory of how we use energy, not just the city itself, like our fleet, our buildings, our facilities, and our operations, but the city of Keene itself, everybody, the cumulative effect of citizens shopping, living in their homes, whatever it is they do, transportation and all of it. But I'm going to start, so the cool thing about this is we measured from 1995 for a 20-year cycle. Well, we have the data, right? That may be one of the first that I'm aware of where the 20-year cycle of evaluating whether you met your targets or not is now complete. So we'll be talking about some of those results, and you're some of the first who are going to hear about it. But first, the quiz, and if your answers are long, they don't count towards my 5 minutes. Okay, so International Panel on Climate Change says the world should reduce by what percentage its greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050? What percentage? 3%?
80.
Any others?
80.
80. Okay, because it kind of depends on what year, because this changes. So the answer is 40 to 70% by 2050, and they're measuring a reduction from 2010. So 2010 is the base year. Reduction in the amount of carbon being emitted in the atmosphere, or greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere by 2050. And that's to limit warming to about a 2-degree increase.
That's what I was thinking.
You got it.
That was close.
Okay, so what's the state of New Hampshire's goal from a 2008 statewide climate action plan? Same framework. How much should the state of New Hampshire reduce its emissions by?
That was 80. That was 80.
80. Who said 80? Ann said 80.
Yes.
No surprise, Ann. So 80% reduction below 1990 levels by 2050. Okay. How about the city of Keene? Okay, we got some city of Keene folks here. We did this inventory in 1995, and we set goals in the early 2000s for a reduction. And you have to remember these numbers because this comes into play later on. 20-year cycle, what were the reduction targets? Anybody know? There were two. City of Keene itself, our municipal operations, we set a 20% reduction goal. So that's our fleet, our buildings, and our operations. And the community, we set a goal for 10%. Not knowing, how much we could actually accomplish, right? Because influencing how people behave in their life is different than, saving the citizens of Keene taxpayer money, number two, fuel or natural gas, or, fueling our operations and our fleet. So we did think we had more control over that, and that's why we set a goal at 20%. And then we'll come back to a question at the end if I still have time. Okay, so the drum roll says, from the point of view of emissions from municipal operations, from 1995 to 2015, the city of Keene reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. Okay, so we exceeded our goal. The emissions from our buildings and facilities sector decreased 31%. And that's wild. And get this, wait a minute, 1 minute? Jesus. That's wild. We increased the amount of building facility in the City of Keene municipal operation by 245,000 square feet. So we increased the amount of building we have. We built new buildings. We operate new buildings. And we still reduced our emissions by 31%. The point of this is it's really doable in so many ways. So I'll stop with the other examples here. Well, wait a minute, I can't, because these are good. Right? Biodiesel in our vehicle fleet, installation of hydroelectric turbines at our water treatment plant, conversion of traffic lights and other lights to LEDs. A lot of folks are doing that. So some really good examples. There are other programs coming with a replacement of fueling and powering our transfer station with biofuel, post-consumer biofuel. For now, project is just being completed now, and in the foreseeable future, we'll be operating that one off the grid still on a totally 100% post-consumer waste. So I'll stop there. Community-wide. So if the city of Keene made a 25% reduction, how about the community itself? Any guesses? That same cycle, 25. We're going into negative numbers, aren't we? All right, I'll be quick, Phil. What's any guesses? Any guesses? What we reduce over that 20-year period?
30.
Community.
30.
15. 40. 40. Oh man.
Oh. 30.
Anybody else?
30.
Try 2.8.
Oh.
Okay. Now the good news is per capita that's 5.4%, right? But almost half of all of our emissions come from on-road transportation, 46%.
Yeah.
We have way more vehicle miles traveled than we did in 1995. Even with fuel switching and better fuel efficiency out of the CAFE standards, that number increased pretty substantially. I think it decreased mostly to external factors, right? Including a move to natural gas as a principal heat source. And I'm getting hip checked out of the way here.
Yeah. You should be.
So, Mary Bruner in the back has some data if you want to look into this further. We are giving a presentation to City Council on Thursday night. Thanks for listening to me.
Speaking of HIPAA checks, I didn't acknowledge the Keene High School hockey team, which I don't think there are any of them here, but for the first time in, I don't know, ever, they won the state championship Saturday night. So that's a pretty cool thing.
Go Blackbirds.
And off the subject also. Okay, we're gonna go right into Andrew. Where's Andrew? There's Andrew right there, and you're gonna hear about Bensonwood and the Unity Homes division thereof. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Specifically about green building technologies and how we're using green building technologies at Unity and Bensonwood to create more efficient buildings that live more lightly on the planet. So my name is Andrew Dye. I'm the operations director at Unity Homes. Unity is a spin-off of Bensonwood that's about 5 years old. Bensonwood's been around for about 45 years. Bensonwood has about 100 employees. Unity has about a dozen. We're based in Walpole, but we just recently opened a new manufacturing facility on Production Avenue in Keene. That's about 100,000 square feet that features some state-of-the-art green building technology. As I thought about this, there are sort of two approaches that I think of when I think of green building technology and how we use it. One is the way in which we use the technology itself to actually build the houses. The other is the technology that we incorporate into the houses that makes them more efficient. So I want to talk about those two different things. This state-of-the-art facility that we just opened in Keene incorporates technology from all over the world. We've got sophisticated automated production lines that come from Germany. We've got insulation machines from Austria. We've got some process planning that comes from Sweden. We've been influenced by kind of automakers in Japan. The way we build houses is to create the large components, the parts and pieces of the house in the manufacturing facility in those controlled conditions using this equipment. And we bring those large parts and pieces to the job site and we assemble them quickly into the weather-tight shell of the house. It's not easy to build a high-performance home. They're complicated. There's different materials that have to come together in specific ways, particular details that have to be achieved in order to make a house that's going to use very little energy, that's going to have healthy indoor air quality, that's going to be durable and long-lasting. And we think the best way to do that is by doing a lot of the work in a shop and then putting it together quickly on site. So we've been using this kind of, we've really been a software-driven company for the last 20 years or so, ever since we invested in our first computerized, numerically controlled equipment, and that's just grown over the years into this facility that we now have in Keene. The other way in which we use green building technology is by incorporating it into the buildings, and this is a field that Henry Spindler will tell you has just been growing dramatically over the last 10 years in terms of what's capable for heating and cooling in particular, and the control systems that help to keep the buildings comfortable, the ventilation systems that provide the fresh air. So these are systems now that are being geared toward the low-load homes that we're creating. We build homes that don't take a lot to heat and cool them, and now there's very efficient technology to provide that heating and cooling. It's generally electric, meaning that it couples well with renewable electric systems, so photovoltaic systems. The homes that we're building at Unity now are all net zero capable, meaning that they can achieve net zero energy with the installation of a relatively modest photovoltaic system. Given that greenhouse gas emissions, the building sector in the United States accounts for about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in this country, we're convinced that any strategy to reduce climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions is going to have to focus significantly on the building sector. We're doing that at Unity Homes, and please come check us out online or talk to me if you'd like to learn more. Thank you.
Look at that, Henry. You didn't even have to flash any numbers. Wow. Okay. Next up, I mentioned earlier filtering manufacturing from right here a mile away, maybe, or not even. And you're going to hear some of the things that filtering is doing just within its own world. And Peter Hansel's going to tell you about it.
I'm going to focus a little bit about what motivates a company like Filtrane or any company to get involved in more sustainable production and operation of their facility. A little background, Filtrane is about 117 years old. Started in Brooklyn, New York for 50 years, lived in New Jersey for another 25 years, moved up to Harrisville in the early 70s, and at the turn of the millennium, pretty much moved into Keene because we'd outgrown our facility in Harrisville. We're a family-owned business. My family, including George, got involved in the business exactly 100 years ago, and our involvement in energy goes back to at least our operation in Harrisville. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We moved our company up from New Jersey. Most of our employees didn't come with us. We had to start all over again. in hiring and training employees to build our products. Our products are drinking water systems, including fountains, filters, ultraviolet sterilizers, and also water chilling systems to cool any kind of equipment that needs cooling, including medical equipment, CAT scans, MRIs, computers, you name it. Anything that needs water as a means of cooling will do that. My father moved the company up, saw that there was, I don't know whether anybody knows that the Cheshire Mills in Harrisville has a big brook running underneath it. And he said, this is an ideal system for water power generation. So he designed and installed a water turbine in the basement of our facility. And we generated about a little over 100 kilowatts of power when the water was available, which was a good amount of time. Sometimes there was way too much water available. But anyway, that was our first foray into the energy field. I happened to be the guy that had to get the unit started, and more importantly, if there was any glitch in the water turbine, I had to run from the 4th floor down to the basement to de-energize that turbine before it spun out of control. We operated that for about 5 years until it became evident that my father had forgotten one main problem. That was to get a FERC license. He assumed that this little brook running underneath our facility wasn't part of the Corps of Engineers' jurisdiction, but he was proven wrong, and we had to eventually, because it would cost way too much to get that license, we had to shut that facility down. However, Historic Harrisville, who took over the operation from us,
Starting it up
when we
again.
moved to Keene, is reinstalling and reactivating that turbine, and they are getting the license. So,
Excellent.
we moved to Keene and continued to look for ways to reduce our overhead and become more sustainable as a company. And I'm just going to go back about 10 years. In 2008, we upgraded all of our lights in our facility. We're a 100,000 square foot facility, had a lot of lights. It cost over $100,000 to do that project. But the payback seemed reasonable for us, and we went ahead with that. We also at the same time replaced some of our old air compressors with more modern variable speed compressors and so forth. And I'm mentioning these for a reason, because one of the reasons we decided to make that change was because we were getting some rebates from Public Service of New Hampshire at the time. They had these rebates available for companies to make energy efficiency moves in their facility. So I'll talk about that in a minute. Our facility in Keene is about 30 years old. Our roof was starting to degrade. We realized we needed to do something about this to keep the roof from leaking as much. But we also tried to accomplish some energy conservation in that process. So we put a whole new layer of insulation on top of our roof with a white membrane that would reflect the heat back into the sky and save energy in the process. That was done in 2009. Over $500,000 to do that roof upgrade. At the same time, we put in some solar hot water heaters for our facility and to heat the water that we were using to test our equipment. And I see I'm at 0 already. So I'm gonna say I've left some handouts in the back. One of the most important things about this whole process is utilizing existing incentives. We just installed a wood chip boiler in our facility. It costs over $300,000 to do that, but we were able to get a grant from the Public Utilities Commission to help defray some of the costs. Froling Energy, and I think Jim is here somewhere, right over here, were the ones that did that installation for us. We are now not using hardly any oil to heat our facility. We're using renewable energy grown and produced right here in the Monadnock region. So utilize the incentives that are out there for all businesses and residents as well. I can't emphasize that enough. So I'll stop right there. And there are handouts in the back.
Thank you, Peter. You didn't know you were doing an outstanding segue into the next presentation. Scott, where's Scott? Oh, there he is up here, okay. How to pay for some of these improvements is obviously a consideration for any business or any organization that's trying to do these kinds of projects.
Scott
And
Slansky.
one of the ways to pay for it, or one of the ways to help pay for it,
CDFA.
is through CDFA clean energy money. So Scott Slansky is going to tell you a little bit about that.
Thank you. Glad to be here tonight, and I live in Keene, so it's nice to be home. Though I have to go to Concord for work, so it would be nice to stay here. But anyway, so I work for the CDFA, this one over here, Community Development Finance Authority. We have three main programs. Our tax credit program and our community development block grant program primarily help with nonprofits and municipalities doing mostly bricks and mortar projects. And I work on our clean energy fund, so I direct the clean energy finance for the organization. Really the main job there is to help support a lot of the projects that you're hearing about tonight and to be sort of complementary to the funding sources that you hear about, the grants and rebates otherwise in the state. So by doing energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, you know, as most of you know, we really can have a strong impact on economic development, community development. You know, the businesses and the organizations that do these projects have lower operating costs and therefore have more money to spend on other things like potentially better pay for their employees or hiring new people or expanding their operations, and all those things are really important, as well as the outcomes in addition to the cost savings and the energy savings can really do a lot for comfort in these facilities, which again is super important, comfort and safety, of course, those non-energy benefits. So, so I just wanted to mention that in most cases, you know, for organizations, for any type of entity, really, cash flow is king. You can't really do projects very well or at all if you're not going to be able to have that cash flow keep going to pay your employees or whatever you need to do to keep your operations going. So by investing, by doing you know, some debt in the process, you're able to reduce those or take away those upfront costs of doing these projects. And also our aim is to make these projects, you know, cash neutral, cash flow positive. So you have some debt. Hopefully your annual payment on that debt is less than your expected annual savings. So it's really a way to support these projects, to be able to move them forward. And hopefully, and one of my big tasks that I find since I started in September is to talk to projects about, you know, what's the bigger picture? You know, if you're doing just a lighting project, have you really thought about, you know, those quick savings that you might get? Can you expand those out into other projects that might take a long time, so that if you do all those quick payback projects, then you have a boiler that you need to replace, you know, should you have thought about that back, you know, way back when. So we get involved at different points in the process, but I really try to expand upon, if you're doing solar, have you reduced your load before you're doing solar? And the thing that I love to see that I'm seeing more and more of is that the contractors that focus just on lighting, or the contractors that focus on solar, they're all starting to ask those questions too, even if they're not, you know, making extra bucks, even if it throws in a little bit of a wrench into their sales pitch. They're finding that they're finding complementary sort of marketing ability there, able to partnerships that they can develop with other contractors, and that's been fantastic to see, and I hope to see more of that. So we serve businesses, municipalities, and nonprofits. We've done a county project as well. So we really serve any, you know, most entities in the state of New Hampshire. Some examples of types of projects we do. We've been involved in manufacturing firms who might do solar either on the roof, ground-mounted system. They might do a fixed system, or a system that tracks the sun during the day. We've done, you know, lease-supported, you know, leases, power purchase agreements, straight-out cash. So there's all these different financing tools out there. Some of you know them, some of you may not. But if you're getting into energy projects, for those of you who are a little bit newer to this or haven't really embarked on like one particular project, there's a lot to all this. There's a lot of different funding sources and financing, types of structures. So just, hunker down, ask a lot of questions, find some people to talk to who can kind of spell it out for you, and we're all connected to, and everyone's happy to share the information. So just know you're going to have to dive in a little bit. Some other examples, we've done a lot of street lighting projects for municipalities. Those have been great projects, often with less than 3-year paybacks, which is fantastic. And we've even seen towns that have been able to say, all right, we're going to save some money quick on that. We're going to take that money, we're going to put it in a pot, and we're going to use it for the next project moving forward. So that the town starts to get a mentality of, we're doing efficiency, and we're not going to sort of hem and haw every time we have to do a project. We actually have this fund over here, supported by efficiency and renewables, that we can then use for future projects. Claremont's done a lot of that, and I've met some other municipalities and businesses that are thinking that way, which is also fantastic. And then we get into multi-measure projects, mixed measure projects that you're doing multiple energy efficiency measures and solar. We've done Maple Manor, which is a housing facility that has, we did weatherization. We didn't do it. I don't install the stuff, but we supported it. Weatherization, they did heat pumps, they installed heat pumps, and they also did solar. And that really enabled them to not only save a lot of money and save a lot of energy, but to have, again, a lot of extra comfort. We also have an energy audit program that reduces the cost for businesses of audits, and I have all that information on the table in the back. Please ask me after. I'm happy to share with you and talk with you about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. We will have time at the end for questions, a little bit more informal interaction. So if you can hold a question that you have for one of the speakers, there'll be a chance to ask that. You mentioned, Scott mentioned housing, and like Peter, he didn't know he was doing the segue, but he did. And Josh Meehan is here from Keene Housing and doing some incredibly innovative stuff that I don't think is being done too many other places in the country, let alone in the state. So we'll hear from Josh Meehan from Keene Housing.
Just scanning.
Thanks
the
very much.
audience here.
Okay, so the speakers get shorter and shorter. Okay. So I should just point out as I get started here what Pam Slack, who's one of my commissioners, pointed out was the reason that we're so innovative is because of the awesome board that we have. And of course I have to mention that since 2 of the 5 are here right now. So I actually was going to dive into some projects that we're doing, but considering we only have 5 minutes, and this is like a Twitter thing, I'm going to stay really meta, right? So I'm going to stay as high up as I can and just kind of give some broad perspective as to, well, why does a provider of affordable housing really, really care about energy? Because I got to say, when I came to Keene, I was a policy person, I do a lot of work in Capitol Hill, and I did not do anything with energy. And I've been here for a little bit over 5 years, and it's fair to say that at this point, energy is probably the thing I spend the second most amount of time on. Because as a provider of affordable housing, who relies on contracts with the federal government to help offset the cost of providing that housing, the reality that Keene Housing lives with is that federal support for the programs that we run, the housing we build, and most importantly, the people we house, is going like this. So as the Fed steps away from its, in my view, obligations to help low-income Americans have a safe place to live, we have to find other opportunities to save money so that we can continue to build new housing and provide quality housing to the folks we already have. So that means modernization. How do we keep things running? So quickly, for perspective, we serve about 971 households, about 1,700 people in Keene and in Swansea. The average income of somebody that we serve who is elderly or disabled is $14,000 a year, and the average income of a working family is around $23,000 a year. So absent our assistance, these are folks who are really, really struggling to find a safe and affordable place to live. So our obligation is to provide the highest quality housing we can to the people that we need to house. And just again, for some perspective, the wait list for a one-bedroom apartment, if you're elderly or disabled, from us is 2.6 years. If you're trying to move into Stone Arch Village Senior, which is right next to our main office on Court Street, the wait list is 7 years.
Wow.
So what does that mean for us? What that means for us is we have to find ways to save money because we're not getting new money from the Fed. How do we do that? So the first thing that we started to do in the last 4 or 5 years is to simply figure out how much we're spending on electricity and water and propane and gas. And that sounds like so boring, and we're talking about PV arrays and all this cool stuff. But for us, the first question was, what are we paying now and how do we find ways to reduce those costs? So what we've been able to do by bringing on board people who know way more about this than I do is benchmark our entire portfolio's consumption against substantially similar properties elsewhere in New England who have the same climate. And once we did that, we were able to grade each property. How does Stone Arch Village compare to a comparably similar elderly property elsewhere in New England? And we get a grade. So twice a year, we get a grade on all of our stuff. And then what that allowed us to do is to find things like water leaks. I didn't know going into this. The number one thing, the thing you go after first is water, because you got leaky pipes all over the place you don't even know about until you start looking really carefully at what your expenses are and benchmarking your consumption against other properties. So we started doing water, then we started doing electricity and looking at the kinds of bulbs we have. What do we have LEDs? Do we not have LEDs? And what's been great, and I think the point that Peter made, which is really well taken, is there are opportunities all around for you to pursue to reduce those costs, but you need to know about them, but they're there, and you can start to go after them. So at this point, we've done an LED retrofitting on our entire portfolio, and it's tremendously reduced our costs. And so we did water, and then we did lighting. So what do we do next? We have electric heating across the majority of our portfolio, and those heat units we have are from 1982. So we did a pilot this year, 2 years ago, where we swapped out those really inefficient old heating systems for heat pumps in a 4-unit building. And what we expected is we would get about 26% reduction in consumption. And that would be, what's really great about it is we only had heat before, now we have heat and we have AC for our residents. And what we found is a 39% savings.
Excellent. Wow.
Which is really great. So,
Yeah.
nice. I'm going to throw the segue back to CDFA and Scott and say, and so what we're trying to do now, and we've just on Friday sent an application to CDFA, is to take that small, hey, little plug, I got a plug, man, to take that pilot, the 4-unit pilot that we've tried out, and we know it worked, we know we saved a ton of energy, and then expand that and scale it up to one of our largest family properties. There's a 38-unit property on Harmony Lane called Forest View, and we're proposing to do that same retrofit there. And the reason we want to do this isn't just to save money, but every dollar we save, that introduces an opportunity cost for us to build new housing. And that's what we're trying to do, is to save what we have and to build new, and energy is critically important to them. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Josh. I did want to point out that if you saw me over there with my phone out, I wasn't looking at my emails or anything like that. I was just trying to keep up with Kate Epson's tweets and do some retweeting. So, and if you want to follow New Hampshire Energy Week, there's stuff out there happening right now. We're going to shift a little bit, both to a different kind of a speaker from a different part of the region. The town of Peterborough for many years has been really at the forefront of things in the renewable energy space. And we're fortunate to have Rodney Bartlett here, who is the town manager for Peterborough and had a previous life as in another position in Peterborough where he is to work on a solar project there. But he'll tell you a number of things that Peterborough is doing in this area. Rodney.
I love him.
Thank you, Phil.
My name is Rodney Bartlett. I've been the town manager in Peterborough for 2 years. Prior to that, I was their Public Works Director for 10. I will tell you, I had much more fun as the Public Works Director than I had as the town manager. So if there are any resumes in the audience, make sure you get them to me before I leave tonight. Our first effort actually started back in 2007 and 8 with an effort with a couple of our neighbors from the Conval District to buy bulk electricity from someone other than public service at the time. It was very hard to convince some people back then that if you went to a third-party supplier, you would still have electricity if that company went out of business. We eventually made it over that hurdle, and the towns of Hancock and Temple joined us. They were the leaders. They were there first. Next year, it included Conval School District, Francistown, and a couple others. Eventually, that group grew to include Conval, the Jaffrey Ringe School District, Jaffrey Ringe, Temple, Francistown, Hancock, Dublin, Swansea. And the bagel mill in town. It's hard to believe how much electricity the bagel mill does use.
Really?
We saved them roughly $1,200 a year when they joined us.
Yeah.
That group turned into a buying collaborative. We would go out annually to different suppliers. We went to Constellation originally back in 2008 and 9. We have avoided costs substantially over the past 9 years. In some cases, our rates were anywhere from 4 or 5 cents below what Eversource or public service was charging at the time. So it's been a good program. But with all these programs, and I don't care whether it's the buying of electricity or your solar or any other effort, the rules change. And in some cases, they may change every year. So some of the things you did previously, which were right decisions and good decisions, may have turned into being, oh, well, should we keep doing this? Most recently, the divestiture of Eversource from their power generation facilities has really changed how you buy electricity, or will change, better term, how you buy electricity. They've already projected electric power rates outside their distribution and transmission of approximately 8 cents a kilowatt. I believe our buying group has a great price today at 6.99 cents a kilowatt. But as we move forward, those would be much different decisions. But just to show how times don't change a lot, when we started this effort back in 2008, 2009, our goal was to be 1 penny below public service. And again, sometimes we were 4 or 5 cents below public service. I think we will be back to some of those original goals with Eversource of being only a penny below them. But still, it's a penny, it's a savings. The other thing we've been able to do is to look at our sources of electricity and look at more renewable sources. Much of our power that we bought in a third party has been supported by wind renewable energy certificates.
9 months out of the year.
So it's been a good program. It's going to change. The rules, as you go through this, whether it's solar, your group net metering, your net metering, there's been changes that haven't been implemented. So if you're getting into this energy business, and I don't care at what level, you really need to keep yourself informed. Either it's with the vendors you utilize, or the brokers, or what have you. That's a very key part on moving that forward. The other aspect of our renewable energy effort has been with Froley Energy. They are a local vendor in Peterborough. We now have pellets in our police station, townhouse, community center, wastewater treatment facility, and we're looking to put them into our new Library of the Future project. It's been a great relationship. I will also tell you what we have learned, that you need a second source of heat for the shoulder seasons or the peaks in the wintertime. And we have used oil. In our case, there's no natural gas to draw on. We may look at other fuels, but that's important to realize. So it's been a good effort. We certainly have reduced our carbon footprint dramatically over the past 9 years. The interest is still there. We're still looking at new technology. And one thing that Scott mentioned, what I think is incredibly important, is those decision-grade energy audits for your buildings. No matter how much you save on your cost for energy, every piece of energy you don't use saves you money at all levels. So I think that's a real important aspect as you look forward to it. So, and resumes? Bill?
Excellent.
he'd like for you to get the resumes to him in the next half hour or so, because he could be on the payroll by midnight for snow removal starting around then.
It's gonna what?
We're going to hear from Eversource next, and I don't know if it's Kate Peters or Paul Hausman or both.
I'm going to let Paul speak.
Oh, Paul's going to speak. Okay. Well, we'll say hi to Kate and hear a little bit about what Eversource is doing these days. Paul.
I'm going to really talk about large commercial and industrial accounts, but Kate is very good at residential, in case you have questions for her. And Laurel, are you over there somewhere? Laurel, I've been working with Laurel a lot because we work with a lot of communities on LED lighting, Keene being one, which was just completed. Keene received a $100,000 incentive, did 1,140 LED lights, dropped their bill by 45%, warm color lighting, less trespassing, beautiful project. Peter, I was the one that came to your facility for a custom project way back. It's probably time for LEDs now. And was it Scott who talked about Claremont? It's funny how we intertwine. Anyway, I'm what they call a strategic account executive. I work from Milford over to Claremont, to Franklin, down to Hinsdale. I work with a very large account. It's a great job. I mean, I get to kind of consult on energy efficiency, my biggest job. I consult on what I see. I can bring in auditors if I want. This is all available for large accounts. I can bring in auditors and they'll identify measures. Keene YMCA, I just brought an auditor in there to review focus study on HVAC. Where do you think you lose so much energy? It's through air movement, bringing in cold air and putting out the conditioned air. I can't wait to see what the proposals there. But I wanted to describe some of my really big success stories. Does anyone know where Sampson is? Sampson moved from Forge Street. Sampson moved into a building that they're going to totally renovate. I pulled off 5 projects there, about $90,000 incentive, and it saves them $57,000 a year. It was a perfect project. Another project that's in motion now is National Grange. They're retrofitting, I think it's close to 2,000 of these fixtures, and they're moving them to LEDs. LEDs use 25% less. They have $50,000, 50,000 years of 50,000 hours of operation. Jesus. But those projects pay back in less than 2 years. They're very effective, better quality light, much more controllable. Like if you look at this space here, man, it's much better lit. I also work with HVAC, cooling and heating. We also work with motors, air compressors. Peter, you said you did an air compressor. Variable speed drive air compressors, they're not always under full load. So when they're not under full load, the variable speed drops the compressor down to less energy use. I've been doing a lot of projects with ski areas, Pat's Peak, Sunapee, Crotchet. You know, what they control is the amount of compressed air, which you put 5 parts of energy in, you get 1 part of compressed air. Anything you can do to decrease the air out of the nozzles or the fan guns, you save energy. More water, more snow for less energy. Pat's Peak, $100,000 this year on an incentive. What I'm leading you to talk about, what I really want to impress on you, if you have any projects coming up or want any projects for large industry or commercial accounts, you got to come and talk to us because we will look at it up front. We'll offer incentive. We'll figure paybacks. We'll bring in consultants if you want to. So just talk to us up front. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now going to go from one side of the region, over in Peterborough, to the other side of the region, Hinsdale, and hear about some exciting stuff going on there from Aaron Stedlow.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This seems like a great event. Really happy to be speaking here. I'm from Falmouth, Maine, and I work for a company called Nextera Energy Resources. And we are North America's largest wind and solar company. So we produce more energy from wind and solar than any other company in North America. Large-scale utility solar project in Hinsdale, New Hampshire, just down the road. We have 2 other projects in New Hampshire as well, both utility scale, a 30 megawatt project we're working on in Fitzwilliam, and a 10 megawatt project we're working on in Concord, New Hampshire. So what do I mean by utility scale? What is that? How is that different than other types of PV that you hear about? Well, utility scale plugs into the grid, plugs into those high voltage transmission lines that you see around the region. And what we do is we look for places with existing infrastructure, existing transmission lines and substations, and compatible land uses around those areas to determine if that's a good place for a solar project. And Hinsdale fits that category. And also, they're a very welcoming town to our project, or the concept of our project. Now, why would we do something like a 50 megawatt solar project? That's a project big enough to supply energy to 7,500 homeowners, okay? Why would we do something that big? Well, a few reasons. New England is one grid operated by something called the Independent System Operator of New England, ISO New England, right? Over the next 5 years, New England's gonna lose 4,000 megawatts of generation capacity, right? Not renewables, but the baseline heavy generators, the oil plants, the nuke plants, right? Those are gonna come offline in the next 5 years, 4,000 megawatts. So what are we gonna do to replace that? We have a few different options, right? We can bring in a bunch of hydro from Quebec, where we're not getting economic benefits from it, or we can build renewables right here, like a 50 megawatt solar project or a 10 megawatt solar project. Any little bit helps to replace that 4,000 megawatts that we're gonna lose in the next 5 years. So New England right now, our load isn't growing because of all the great work that people from Eversource are doing with efficiency and other groups, but we're losing that generation. So we intend to replace it with renewables. So we started developing the Hinsdale project that we call Chariot Solar about 1.5 years ago. And we met with the town and they expressed an interest in having our project in the town. And we met with the landowners and we conducted a number of environmental studies. So we've done all the due diligence that you need to do to build a big energy project. Wetland delineations, vernal pools, cultural resources, and all these other things. And right now we're in the process of getting the project connected, or the permission to connect the project through the ISO New England process right into the 115,000 volt transmission lines that already cross the property right there to put this clean, cost-effective, renewable energy onto the grid. Hinsdale is going to benefit from our project by getting a big boost in taxes. This is going to be a $50 million plus project. We're going to pay lease revenues to our landowners, and we're going to do some other economic incentive work in the community. But our project doesn't use many services either, right? So you think about residential and other types of commercial development, those types of projects use town services, which is great and fine, but a solar project is a nice quiet neighbor that pays a whole bunch of taxes. So that's what we're looking to do in Hinsdale, and that's what we're looking to do elsewhere in New Hampshire in the region. We have a 20 megawatt project going in to construction this spring in Vermont, just over the border in Ludlow. So if folks want to come check that out, you can come see that. That project alone, in the first 20 years, will offset 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide as compared to the same amount of generation produced just by the grid as it is with all of its natural gas. So if you can think about that, 50 megawatts is going to do well above twice that. So thanks very much. Happy to answer questions later.
Thank you, Aaron. John, where's John? There he is. Okay, wrapping up tonight, the Keene State part of a person couldn't be here last minute, so our final speaker, if you know John Condos or have seen him operate around this part of the world, this is one creative guy and doing some really cool stuff. So, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Phil. This is really a great juxtaposition because you just heard about megawatts and we're talking about kilowatts. I represent a small nonprofit that's all volunteers, and we basically are just trying to do things. We've done a lot of work over the years in energy efficiency, which I can't stress enough. All the things you heard today, if you haven't heard it enough, I'll say it one more time. Megawatts are the most efficient and cost-effective form of electricity, meaning no watts, megawatts. But I'm here to talk quickly about community solar, and I also want to go to the higher level as Josh did. Community solar is in a way for people who couldn't otherwise get solar to get it. So in other words, businesses such as Phil Tree and others, and homeowners who have the capital and the tax appetite, I wonder if they haven't already, why they haven't, unless they just don't have a good solar site to get solar. So that's fine, and that's what some of the businesses in the community that are here, we have some good solar contractors that can service them. What we looked at was how do we service the people who can't get solar, just typically nonprofits, low and moderate income folks like that. And so we, in 2013, embarked on an exploration. We partnered with Antioch. We had a great group of students do some research for us because this was a very, very new field, very, very tiny part of the solar industry at the time, only going on in a few states around the country. Nothing anywhere near here. A little bit in Vermont, maybe a tiny bit in Mass. So long story short, we figured it out, had a great team, and we put the project together on the co-op. The model is really simple. We found a way for local investors to put their money in, and those investors had the tax appetite, so they were going to get those tax incentives. They own the system, but the intent is then to sell the system to, in this case, the co-op. And so the real message here is, and I encourage you to go on to our website and you can see a neat little video with naked roofs, and that's a really important part of this message. The first year that the co-op was there, the roof was naked and it generated $0. And in the second year, with the new photovoltaic system, it kept $4,600 worth of money in our local economy, split between the investors and the co-op. A lot of naked roofs, go see the video. Now I want to dial quickly up to a higher level. I think there's some things we need to do to be able to make this happen. We're open to doing more of these projects, but they're extremely difficult for a number of reasons. The incentives in New Hampshire are off again, on again. They're pretty weak by and large. So as citizens, you might take issue with that and perhaps communicate that with your representatives. On a federal level, we lack the will and the incentive to do things. And I think there is a point at this that we just have to step up and put a price on carbon. I've done a lot of homework on this, and I really think something like the Citizens Climate Lobby proposal for carbon fee of dividends, the kind of policy that will accelerate solar energy conservation and a shift to renewables on a level that we all would like to see. I trust we all would like to see that. I know I do. And that program is really simple. We put a price on carbon at the port, mine, or well, so that it's right where it's produced or where it enters the economy, and then all that money is collected and given back to every household in America as a dividend. So I don't know if anyone gets a dividend check or a dividend in some form, but it is a really neat thing to get. I really enjoy them when I see them. My wife gets one from a company that somehow she invested in. I'm not even sure how it happened, but the dividend check is a cool thing. Imagine you got a dividend every month from the U.S. government that was collected from those who are destroying our planet, and that we would, in that simple action, reduce that pollution so it's effective. It's very efficient because it's very economical. All this money would be transferred back through systems that are already in place. Most Americans are somehow either connected to the IRS, Social Security Administration, or other government entities. They're already processing transfers, so it's not going to be an expensive process to get those dividends up. But finally, it really is going to be effective. It's going to reduce those carbon emissions by over 40% from 1990 levels within 20 years. And we need that kind of thing. It's not the only answer, but it's a significant one. And the best part, and this is the part you may not realize, but it's achievable. Citizens Climate Lobby works very hard on this, and MSN has endorsed this policy because we believe in it. But the real reason is there are now 72 members of the House Climate Solutions Caucus. Now, that's one of the biggest caucuses in the House of Representatives, but the exciting thing is half of those are Democrats and half of those are Republicans.
Yeah.
So do the math. There are caucuses you hear a lot about that are much smaller, they're much more vocal. This is a relatively new one, but the dynamics in the House are shifting, meaning that there are now close to 40 Republican House members who say, yes, climate change is a problem and we want to do something. So contrary to some of the things we hear, it's real and we've got solutions. And this is one very viable one. So the last thing I want to leave you with is the financial part. We've learned very quickly that unfortunately it's very difficult. We have a very limited pool of investors to do these community solar projects. And so we really are working very hard. And again, I encourage any of you to be active with your representatives and senators, but to push for tax reform that would broaden the pool of investors that can invest in these projects. Because we've had a lot of people come up to us and say, boy, I'd love to invest in a community solar project, but they can't because they don't have the right kind of passive income. It's a very narrow definition. And my time's up, but I really hope that I've stimulated with some ideas and some solutions and some action items. And we're also looking for nonprofits that are interested in doing community-supported solar.
Thank you, John. What you've just heard over the past few minutes is kind of a snapshot, just the tip of the iceberg of some things that are going on in the Monadnock region. And I'd like to take a few minutes. We have a few minutes left. I promised Tommy to get on the road and by a certain time. Yeah, a storm coming right now. But I'd like to open up the floor to anybody who wants to ask a question, to anybody who's spoken thus far.
I'd like to ask a question to Aaron.
Yes, sir.
What about the potential for offshore wind energy?
Absolutely. So actually, years ago, I worked on some of the environmental permitting for the Block Island Wind Farm. And I think offshore wind has great potential in our region. One of the challenges with offshore wind is just the cost right now. And that's come down quite a bit. But at the same time, the cost of solar and onshore wind, but primarily solar, has also come down. So, Rodney was talking about some prices before. I'd love to talk to you because that's right in our ballpark right now. If you ask that offshore wind, I think they'd be hard pressed to answer that. But it's a great solution, and it's going to replace a lot of.
Yeah. Aaron, I'm wondering if your company has a focus on offshore wind as a potential revenue for the company in the future.
Currently, we're not, but currently that's not a major focus for us. One of the big things we are focusing on in this region is storage. So battery storage to make those renewables that we already have or that are coming online more useful so we can use them later in the evening, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question for anybody? I'm going to hand this to you.
I didn't speak loudly.
Oh yeah, you're good. All right.
Tad Montgomery, I am the Energy and Facilities Coordinator Manager in Lebanon, New Hampshire. We are looking at municipal aggregations, but with real-time pricing. So if there's anyone here who has experience with that, I'd love to talk with you.
Anybody
Belo's
have resonate with anybody?
That's Clifton Belo's project. It's a
We'll
pilot.
find you if we find someone. Anybody else? Yeah, JB.
Yeah. Aaron Spedlow, do you work on brownfield sites? Does your company work on brownfield sites? Or do you mostly stay with greenfields?
We do. So it's a mix, and that's a really good question. And I get that a lot, actually. Brownfields are important. We should be building those out. But if we want to meet our goals for renewable energy, there's not enough brownfield sites in New England, thank God, to meet those goals. And one of the challenges with renewables is, they're land intensive, right? You could build a 600 megawatt combined cycle gas plant down the road and you wouldn't know it's there, right? Because it would take up a few acres. But renewables have a bigger footprint. The other challenge with brownfield sites is they don't always correspond with where there's existing electrical infrastructure. So there might be a great brownfield site, but it's 20 miles from a substation, and then you got to run this power line there, and that's a big impact and a big cost. But we do look at them, absolutely.
And a really interesting project in Peterborough a few years back, a solar that repurposed an entire piece of property that wasn't being used otherwise. I'll just leave it at that. At least not at that moment. Rodney can explain that if you want to know more about that. Yes.
I'm wondering if there's anybody in the room who could tell me what the current state is of the cost of solar and wind versus gas or oil right here in Keene or in the Monadnock region.
Anybody want to take that one on, or even on a statewide basis?
There.
Well, it's kind of hard to compare because oil is mostly used for heat, and solar and wind are for electricity.
And there's someone here that can answer this better than I am right now, but just to start it off, oil is usually used to burn electricity at the peak times of the day when it's the absolute most expensive. So, all in, solar is less than using oil to generate electricity. If you generate electricity with solar and then you use a heat pump to do heating or cooling, that's also a pretty good value. I don't have exact numbers for you because, often it involves net metering. Are you kind of going back and forth with the grid? So are you getting like comparable rates for what you pay otherwise to pull from the regional system? And then kind of, what kind of fuel are you using and what are you doing with it? But I don't know if people have numbers to add to that. It's a hard apples to oranges comparison sometimes.
Is that a quick number?
Dan Weeks, Revision Energy. Working on a lot of solar projects for a wide variety of clients. We see for businesses where it makes most financial sense because you can maximize the tax incentives, long-term rates of electricity in the 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour range compared to current rates in the 10 to 12 cents all in and rising over time to closer to 20 cents. For homes and nonprofits, it's more in the 5 to 7 cents a kilowatt hour. But if you're able to generate your heating and cooling needs as efficiently as heat pumps do, paying a rate when you take the cost of the system divided by the production of that system in kilowatt hours, that's 5-6 cents or less. It makes very good financial sense.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question?
Scott still here?
Yep.
Yeah, Scott, I want to know if Josh got himself a bonus point on Keene Housing's application.
It's a secret system, I can't.
Scott, could you talk a little bit about the prognosis of the funding picture for the programs that you're familiar with?
Sure, some of them more than others. I mean, I know one of our primary goals with the Clean Energy Fund for the financing purposes is that we've got a number of different loan pools, and sometimes it's difficult to fit projects in eligibility-wise, but we're really, gearing up to try to make that one of the more continuous sources of, funding in the it's not funding, financing projects in the state. As far as incentives, like from the utilities, Kate would be much better to answer some of that.
So on the incentive side, and I should mention there's an NH Saves magazine on the back table, so anyone who's interested in doing efficiency projects and what incentives are available, there's a page in the back with all of our programs that we run, residential and the large commercial that Paul talked about. But in terms of funding for efficiency programs in the state, we're actually in a ramp-up phase, which is really exciting. If you had asked me 5 years ago if New Hampshire would be expanding our energy efficiency programs by a large amount, I would have kind of not guessed that was going to happen, but there have been a lot of positive changes in the past few years. And so we are embarking on a ramp up of the program. So starting in 2018, 2019, and 2020, we have increased energy savings goals for energy efficiency. We have to get more savings each year, and that is intended to come with an increase in funding for the programs as well. So the offerings that are available through the programs through NH Saves will be kind of expanded upon. We're building on what we've had before, so we'll be able to help more homes, more low-income homes, more businesses, more municipalities do energy efficiency projects, all with the goal of getting more energy savings. So it's kind of an exciting time. we're certainly not to the extent that some larger states like Massachusetts that are really aggressive on these things, but it's a really good ramp up for New Hampshire and good opportunities out there.
Thank you, Kate. Jim has a question.
Actually, I wanted to give an answer that biomass is always forgotten about, and solar is very exciting and renewable and all that, and we're quite renewable too. It's a fuel that the forests are being forested, they're being harvested in sustainable ways, and we always like to talk about that as a part. Solar, wind, and biomass is really important, especially to New Hampshire. We have so much woods here, and there's a lot of action in the woods, and 75% of what they take out of the woods is low-grade lumber, low-grade timber. And that can turn into the biomass, wood pellets and chips and so forth. There's been a lot of plants like, say, Concord Steam and things that have been shut down, or they're marginal. And these guys need to sell off the 75% of the wood fuel that's out there. And doing the chips that we're manufacturing in Peterborough right now, and also we have a lot of customers using wood pellets. So Jaffrey and Peterborough are suppliers of this, as well as all sorts of green chip suppliers all over the region here and all over the state and Vermont and so forth. Just for an example, what Peter's doing at Filtrene is a dry chip that we make in Peterborough, and it sells for the equivalent of 80 cents a gallon of fuel oil. So that's after thermal RECs. There's also a lot of rebates and things out there for both commercial and residential installations that amount to about 40% up to certain financial limits. But very generous. New Hampshire is very, very generous for this. And if you think about heat as being one of our biggest, in most households, it's the biggest energy user, that's just a very, very important factor. So, and you're like $2 a gallon if you're just wood pellets in a typical boiler in your house. So these prices are right in there. And when you're commercial, there's actually something RECs. You can get RECs for commercial scale projects, and that brings down the price really nicely. So a lot of good things. And I just thought, that's a fuel that's very cost effective, and we all know what we're paying for oil. It's been going up lately. So a big boost for biomass.
Thank you, Jim.
I wanted to add a point to what Jim was saying. You also have a non-trivial point, which is carbon neutral as well. And that's a very, very important point to make. So for offsetting a fossil fuel with wood, we're carbon neutral and we're winning the bigger game. Right.
Peter.
Two things. First of all, I just wanted to say my house just happened to go through a New Hampshire Saves program, just finished up this past week. So you don't have to be a low-income, family to do this. Your house has to qualify. Our house happens to be a 150-year-old house, and it definitely qualifies. It's got a lot of old structure to it, but so that's just a plug for New Hampshire Saves. Look into that if you want to do that. But the question I have is somebody made a comment about storage, and I'm wondering if there's any movement to have kind of a prototype storage facility anywhere in New Hampshire. I think there are some in Vermont, but I don't know of any in New Hampshire.
Actually, in the Liberty utility territory, they're doing 1,000 residential locations right now here in New Hampshire. It's the first of its kind. That's in the Liberty utility territory.
Where is that?
What storage? Is that power storage?
Yeah, batteries.
Yeah, okay.
What towns?
One served by a Liberty.
Okay. All right. That was Bob Hayden.
Hearing a theme. Anybody else? Yeah, Tim.
Thank you, Phil. This isn't so much a question, but just to, while we have a captive audience, I think that there's folks in the room who've been very active, very busy, and for folks who aren't aware, the Keene Cities for Climate Protection has been at it for a number of years, making some real groundbreaking and promising work, good progress here locally in the city. There's also a lot of talk recently about and I'm not the best person in this room to talk about this, but a Southwest New Hampshire energy hub. The idea being that there are many municipal energy committees that could learn a lot from each other and maybe make a lot of progress by peer learning and doing things together rather than alone. And also to mention that you heard John Condos talk about a coalition in Congress, and our District 2 Congresswoman Annie Custer is among those. So just to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it is Monday night. The weather is deteriorating in a few minutes. Well, not a few minutes, a few hours.
Midnight.
Oh, one more question? Wait, one more? Oh, Keene.
I just have to make one last plug. If you own a small business in this region, there's a great program that you can tap into if you're thinking about biomass or solar. It's totally free to you. It's technical assistance. It's run by the Lakes Region Community College, but they go all over the state. And they'll come and do a site visit. They'll give you a report. They'll assess your site for these technologies. I'm going to leave flyers up front. So if you're interested in that, please do tap into it. It's going on right now, and they're happy to come help you with the project.
Awesome. And if anything...
Hi. So I just wanted to ask
Are you
one.
going to film and talk at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, this is good.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of that, the program that Kate just talked about, do you happen to know when the RFPs for that low moderate income community solar will be issued, and whether anything is going to be done about people qualifying to be investors in the in that community solar project like that?
Sure, so this is a slightly separate program. The PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, is likely to issue an RFP, request for proposals, this month, either the end of this month or I'd say very early next month, to solicit projects that will bring community solar projects to low-income ratepayers and consumers. And the projects, you can come up with different models. They're looking for different ideas. It just has to provide direct benefits to those customers. And really it's incumbent upon the respondent to bring whatever model and investment type to the table.
I just mention it because I know that community resource for evaluating projects coming out that you talked about did one in Ringe, and so it's more low moderate income people who would be interested at. They're a community agricultural group, community supported agriculture, so CSA.
Great, yeah, so if you're interested in this type of project, be on the lookout for that coming from the Public Utilities Commission.
Okay, we did say 4:30 to 6:30. We're going to beat that by a couple of minutes. I want to thank all of the presenters. Let's have a round of applause for all of the presenters. Those are only a few of the stories in our region. There are a lot of other really good stories. If there's anything you heard today, you're driving home or say, geez, what was that about? Call us at the chamber or the planning commission, and we'll try to make sure that you get connected with the right person who spoke about something if you want to get connected to something you heard. There is some material in the back from a number of the presenters and organizations that are here, so I encourage you to take advantage of that, take it home with you. Drive safely. I know the crew here at Scores wouldn't mind if